Hello, and thank you for listening to this episode of the Moore's October Rants. Today's episode is titled, Balancing Advice. Over the years, I have come to realize that navigating the opinions, advice, and criticisms of other people is one of the most delicate balancing acts in adult life. On one hand, we are social creatures, shaped in part by the communities we keep and the voices we allow into our inner world. On the other hand, if we are not careful, we can easily lose ourselves in the noise, letting the contradictory shouts of everyone around us pull us in a dozen different directions until we no longer know which way is truly our own. So I have spent a good deal of time thinking about how I engage with what people tell me, and I have landed on an approach that feels both grounded and open, firm yet flexible. It is not about shutting people out or branding them as enemies the moment they disagree with me. It is not about building a fortress around my ego so that no critique can ever penetrate. Rather, it is about cultivating a genuine habit of listening, then sifting, then choosing, all while maintaining my own sense of direction and self-worth. The first thing I try to remember is that every person who offers me advice or feedback is coming from their own unique set of experiences, biases, wounds, and victories. When someone tells me I am doing something wrong, or that my perspective is skewed, or that I could be approaching a situation better, their words are not an objective truth handed down from on high. They are a reflection of how they see the world, filtered through everything they have been through. That does not mean their words are worthless, but it does mean I have to do the work of translating them into something useful for my own life. So instead of immediately bristling or feeling attacked, I try to pause and truly take in what they are saying. I ask myself, what is the kernel of their message? Is there a grain of honesty in here that I am too proud or too scared to see? Sometimes, the most uncomfortable criticisms are the ones that carry the most weight, precisely because they hit a nerve that I have been avoiding. In those moments, I force myself to sit with the discomfort and honestly assess whether they might be right about something I have been blind to. That takes a level of humility that does not come naturally to most of us, but I have found that it is the only way to grow. However, listening with an open mind does not mean I surrender my own judgment. There is a world of difference between hearing someone out and letting them steer the ship of my life. I can absorb what they say, turn it over in my mind, compare it against my own values, my own lived experiences, and my own long-term goals, and then make a conscious decision about whether to incorporate that feedback or set it aside. That is where personal sovereignty comes in. I am the one who wakes up in my body every morning. I am the one who has walked my particular path, faced my particular struggles, and celebrated my particular victories. No outsider, no matter how wise or well-intentioned, knows the full texture of my inner life. So while I value their perspective, I am also careful not to hand over the keys to my self-worth or my decision-making process. Their advice is data, not destiny. It is input, not instruction. I take it in, I weigh it, and then I act according to what feels true and right for me, not according to what will please them or prove them wrong. There is also the important matter of distinguishing between constructive critique and mere projection. Not everyone who speaks into my life has my best interests at heart, and even those who do can sometimes project their own fears or unmet desires onto me. For instance, a person who has always played it safe might criticize my risk-taking because it makes them anxious about their own choices, not because my path is actually unwise. Another person who craves external validation might urge me to chase status or money because those are the metrics they use to measure success, but those may not be my metrics at all. Learning to recognize when someone's advice is really about them and not about me has been a game changer. It allows me to accept their input with grace and gratitude, knowing they are trying to help in their own way, while also gently discarding the parts that do not fit my reality. I do not have to argue with them or prove that they are projecting. I simply take what is useful and leave the rest, all without making them wrong for offering it. As I have gotten older, I have also grown much more selective about which battles I am willing to fight. In my younger years, I felt this burning need to correct every misunderstanding, to defend my reputation against every slight, and to convince every skeptic that I was right. It was exhausting, and frankly, it rarely worked. People do not change their deeply held beliefs because someone wins a debate against them. In fact, the more aggressively you push, the more entrenched they often become, because their ego gets tangled up in their position, and admitting you are right feels like admitting they are weak or foolish. So I have learned to pick my moments carefully. If a conversation is genuinely productive, if the other person is actually listening and engaging in good faith, then I am happy to exchange ideas and maybe even learn something new. But the moment I sense that the other person is just waiting for their turn to speak, or that they are more interested in being right than in finding truth, I quietly disengage. Not out of arrogance, but out of simple self-preservation. My energy is finite, and I would rather spend it on people and pursuits that lift me up than on endless back and forth that changes nothing. That said, stepping away from unproductive arguments does not mean I stop listening altogether. It just means I stop investing in futility. I can still respect the person as a human being while acknowledging that we see the world too differently to have a meaningful exchange on certain topics. And that is okay. Not every difference of opinion needs to be resolved. Not every critic needs to be converted. Sometimes, the healthiest thing I can do is wish them well and move forward with my own life, carrying with me whatever small piece of their perspective made sense and leaving the rest behind. This approach keeps me from becoming bitter or closed off, because I am not rejecting the person. I am simply choosing where to direct my attention. At the same time, I am constantly aware of the danger of living inside an echo chamber. If I only ever surround myself with people who agree with me, I will slowly lose the ability to see my own blind spots. That is why I actively invite diverse viewpoints into my life, even when they challenge me. I read authors I disagree with. I have conversations with friends who hold different political or spiritual views. I pay attention to feedback that makes me squirm. But I do all of this with a grounded sense of self, so that I can be influenced without being controlled. I can be shaped without being broken. I can learn from others without abandoning my own inner compass. It is a fine line to walk, but I believe it is the hallmark of emotional maturity. In the end, the goal for me is not to be right all the time or to never be questioned. The goal is to grow steadily, to become a more thoughtful, compassionate, and self-aware person than I was yesterday. And that growth requires input from the outside world. It requires the friction of clashing ideas. But it also requires the wisdom to know when to hold firm and when to bend, when to absorb and when to deflect, when to engage and when to walk away. I do not pretend to have perfect clarity in every moment. I make mistakes. I misjudge. I sometimes dismiss good advice out of pride and sometimes cling to bad advice out of fear. But I keep coming back to this practice of listening deeply, thinking critically, and choosing intentionally, because I know that is the only way to honor both the people who speak into my life and the person I am becoming. And when I look back on all the advice I have received over the years, both good and bad, I realize that the most valuable lessons often came not from the people who told me what I wanted to hear, but from the ones who cared enough to tell me what I needed to hear, even if it stung. Those are the voices I cherish. Those are the relationships I nurture. But I also remember that in the end, the final decision about how to live my life rests with me alone. No one else has to live with the consequences of my choices the way I do. So I listen, I consider, I reflect, and then I act. And I do all of this not from a place of fear or defensiveness, but from a place of quiet confidence that I am capable of handling both the praise and the critique, the agreement and the opposition, without losing myself in the process. That, to me, is what true maturity looks like. This concludes this episode of the Moors October Rants. Thank you for listening. Signing out. Goodbye for now.